Thank you so much for having me on. Sanjit, always a pleasure to talk to you. Everybody from Team Hippo, absolute pleasure to be here. Can everyone just say hi or hello just for me to know that your chat options are working and that you know that this is an interactive session. We will be talking about neuroscience, we'll be talking about the brain, we will be talking about how we make decisions. But hi everyone. Hi Vishnu, hi Abrimi, hi Avinash, Kalyani, Naveen, AJ, Vinod, Charan, Priyadarshini, Shrikant, Aryan. Thank you so much for saying hello. This is what I really want. I don't want this to be a lecture. I'm very clear on that. Lectures don't work, conversations work. So we will be circling back to this at the end of our discussion when we talk about teamwork. But here's a little spoiler for you. Conversations work, lectures don't. So on that note, let us begin. I don't know how many of you have heard of me before or seen any of my videos before. If you have, then just please say yes or give a shout out so I know that there are some of you who know a little bit about the brain and neuroscience. It's always nice to have people already in the audience who know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, don't worry. We are going to start from scratch. Even if you've never ever heard about neuroscience, by the end of this 1 hour, you will have a pretty decent idea. We are going to start. One second, I'm just going to share my screen and then you can all confirm if you can see it. Yeah. Avinash has seen me on Beer Biceps. Okay, excellent. So I recently went for a podcast on Ranveer Alapadia's show, and we spoke a lot about neuroscience and mental health. So I'm glad, Avinash, that you saw that. Srihari, not me, but look forward to listen. This is one of my favorite topics. Srihari, you're going to love it even more by the end of this discussion. So the topic for today was critical thinking, but I have named it as the science of decision making because decision making comes even before critical thinking, and I'm going to explain why. Before we go too deep into neuroscience, let's talk about a much more primary question. When do we decide? When was the last time, according to you, that you had to make a decision? I'm asking you for real. Think about it. In your life today, it is what? It's 6:30 now. When was the last time that you had to make a decision? Was it today afternoon when you had to order lunch? Was it when you had to change your job? Was it when you had to say yes to your partner who proposed? When was the last time that you had to make a decision? And I mean, make it. Maybe it was when you wanted to decide if you wanted to join this call or not. Maybe you were feeling lazy. You thought that, man, there's a new movie on Netflix, but then I did say that I will join this Zoom call. So you have to decide to click this link. All of that is true. And like somebody said, Vinod said every moment. So that makes an even more interesting question. When do we not decide? Is there any moment in your life when you are not deciding something? Is there any moment when your brain is already free of decision making? It is a logical question, it's a philosophical question, it's a spiritual question, because who are we? So, more than thinking about when are we deciding and not deciding, let's change the question a little bit to think about who is this we that we're talking about? Who is doing the decision making? Because we love to think about ourselves as I. I am the person. I am everything. It is me. It is I. But who is this I that we are talking about? So who are you to decide? This is a question that gets asked on Twitter a lot of times. Tu kaun hota hai? Who are you to decide for me? So we are going to leave the threatening tone out of it, and we are just going to talk about who are you? What is the neuroscience of you? Because when we understand decision making, before that we have to understand who is the decider. All right. A couple of very interesting comments. When you're confused, you're not deciding. On the contrary, when we are confused, you're trying to decide a lot. While sleeping, interesting point, but actually decisions are made when we are sleeping as well. When there is a habit or discipline, no need to make decisions. Very interesting point, and I'll be talking about it. Actually, Even when there is a habit, it's not that you're not taking a decision, it's that you're outsourcing the decision to a more primitive part of your brain. And we will be talking about that very soon. Heart versus mind. I'm sorry to break it to you, Sri Hari, but actually the heart has very little to do with decision making. It is a very romantic theory, but unfortunately, everything is the brain. So, who are you? What is the neuroscience of you? This is what you look like. Now, I know that none of your selfies look like this, but if you remove all the extra baggage out of you, this is what you look like. You are a brain and a spinal cord. And from that spinal cord and from that brain comes out lots of things called as nerves. And these nerves control muscles, and that muscles help us move. That is it. This is who you are. Everything around this system is in order to support this system. The food that we eat is so that this system is alive. The heart pumps blood so that the system gets oxygen. Everything else, the lungs breathe so that the system gets oxygen. Everything else is to keep this system alive. So when you say, who are you? This is you. Okay. I'm sorry that we started on such a philosophical note. I'm sorry if any of you is getting an existential crisis, but bear with me. It is going to be worthwhile. If you are getting an existential crisis, tell me. I would love to know, because why should I suffer alone? This is what I go through every day. So this is you. You are your brain and your spinal cord. Let's look at it a little bit more in detail. When I say that you are your brain and your spinal cord, what does the spinal cord do? The spinal cord controls your hands and your legs in a reflex way. If I prick a pin on your hand and your hand pulls back, that is your spinal cord. As you go upwards, you are actually following the track of evolution. So evolution went from down to up. So the earliest to evolve was the spinal cord. Then something called as the brain stem evolved. Now the brain stem has the role of controlling your heart, your breathing, your blood pressure, all your basic survival things. Then came an area called as the limbic system, which controls emotions. And finally is your cortex, which is your most evolved part of the brain. And that is called as the prefrontal cortex. So this is how evolution happened. Now, different parts of you, and now when I say you, I mean different parts of your nervous system have different jobs to play. Your spinal cord wants to keep you alive by reacting very quickly to things. Your brainstem wants to keep you alive by making sure that your heart is working, your lungs are working. Your limbic system wants to keep you alive by making sure that your emotions are in place. That means that you're afraid of danger and that you're attracted towards food and that you're attracted towards sex. And your prefrontal cortex wants to keep you alive by making sure you make the right decisions. And this is where the topic of today comes into the picture. When we say decision making, when we say that I am deciding something, the real question is, which part of your neural system is making that decision? Because can you say that your spinal cord is not you? No, of course, it is a part of you. If I prick you with a pin and your hand goes back, did you do that? Or did your spinal cord do that? It's part of you. Your spinal cord is a part of you. When your heart is beating really fast, did you decide to make your heart beat faster? No, but then is your spinal cord or is your brainstem a part of you? Yes, it is. When you feel very angry, when you see something you don't like, when a comedian makes a joke and you are offended, are you offended or is your limbic system offended? If you decide to make an angry tweet, did you decide that or did your limbic system decide that? And finally, a prefrontal cortex, which is the most evolved part of you. So when we say decision making, we are talking of which part of your brain is deciding. So we are going to divide you into 4 parts. There is the spinal you, which is all about spinal reflexes. There is the brainstem you, which is all about keeping your heart rate and your blood pressure okay. The limbic you, which is the emotional you. And finally, the cortical you, which is the logical, calculating, reasonable you. Any questions so far? Now is the time to ask. 45 people listening. I'm very happy to see you all. Welcome to this conversation. The chat is open. If you have any questions so far about the neural anatomy, whatever I've spoken about, now is the time, because after this, we're going to go deeper into the neuroscience of decision making itself. How many of you have heard this poem, Invictus? I'm the master of my own fate. I'm the captain of my soul. When I was preparing for this lecture, that I got reminded of that poem, and I got reminded of how we consider ourselves as a complete unit, and we consider our identity as one whole. But that is not the case. There are multiple factions within us. Think of it like a country. India is a country, but that doesn't mean that Maharashtra doesn't have problems with Gujarat. That doesn't mean that Bihar doesn't have a problem with Kerala. So all of it is under one identity, but then the smaller factions also have their own say in the matter, right? So that brings us to the complexity of decision making. So when we say who is deciding, each one of these different parts have their own say in the matter. And so the spinal cord will vote on what to do. The brainstem will vote on top of that. The limbic system will vote on top of that. And finally, the prefrontal cortex will have the final say. There is a book by Daniel Kahneman called, oh, I'm sorry. There's a book by Daniel Kahneman called as Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've not read this book, I would recommend that you all read it. He divides the neural system into system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is the primitive limbic system. It is the fast system. It is the instinctive system. It is the emotional system. It is a system that has evolved over millions of years, and it is what we call as gut instinct. It is what we call, absolutely, we know it, lizard brain. It is the part of the brain that acts when our prefrontal cortex is too shocked to act. It is when we say, let's just live in the moment, let's just go with the flow. That is all system 1. System 2 is the more evolved part. It is the prefrontal cortex part. This is the part that takes apart things, that looks at things from different angles, that tries to calculate the pros and cons. It is the part that help you come to a logical conclusion. It is a part that helps you solve general knowledge questions or IQ questions. So that is system 2. System 2 is slow. System 2 takes time because system 2 is more recently evolved. System 2 is inexperienced. It doesn't know the intricacies of everything. It is still learning. So system 1 and system 2 is a great way of trying to understand our brain, limbic and prefrontal, lizard brain and human brain. It's a great way to think about yourself. So forget about the spinal brain, forget about the brainstem brain. Now we will remove those two and we will only think about limbic and prefrontal. The reason I mentioned the other two is because, one, for completeness, and two, because there are some situations where that also matters. But for now, we are talking of system 1 and system 2. There is a saying that decisions are made emotionally and justified logically. Now that you know about the background, what do you think this means? Made emotionally and justified logically. It means that the decision comes from the limbic, and the prefrontal cortex, more often than not, has the job of justifying it to yourself. I'll give you a simple example. You say that you are on a diet. We've all been there. Somebody comes and gives you Kaju Katli. Now, you pick up that Kaju Katli and you put it in your mouth and you start chewing. Where did this decision come from? You say that you are on a diet, but here you are eating a Kaju Katli. Now, what do? Either you can say that I failed as a person, I failed as a human being because there is a clear conflict. I said that I was on a diet and yet here I am. Or you can say, but it's Diwali, but it's my friend's wedding, but I went to the gym today morning, but I was hungry. Everything that your brain does is a way of justifying a decision that your limbic system has already taken, unless you say otherwise, unless you are careful, unless you stop your limbic system from taking that call. As Srihari very rightly said, Kaju Katli is irresistible and I am weak. We all aim to have that level of insight because that is the truth. Kaju Katli is irresistible and most of us are weak when we are faced with it, unfortunately. Or for some of you, it could be chocolate cake. For some of you, it could be a drink in the evening. All of us have our own devil's temptation, but the primary neuroanatomy of that decision remains the same. Limbic system says, "Are le le yaar." The limbic system says, "Try it, it's fine." And the prefrontal cortex now has the job of justifying it to yourself that this is why I did it. I am not a bad person. Okay. Now, before we get to the challenges, I want to explain something very, very important to you, which is the molecular mechanism of decision making. And that involves a hormone called as dopamine. I am sure that all of you have heard about dopamine. What do you think dopamine is? If you've heard about dopamine, what do you know about dopamine? You may have heard that dopamine makes you happy. You may have heard that dopamine is what gives you pleasure. You may have heard that when you do something that feels very good, like eat a chocolate cake or have sex, then that feeling of wow in your brain is because of a dopamine kick. You may have heard of a sense of satisfaction. Yes. You may have heard of addiction, that when somebody is addicted, they're actually addicted to that dopamine kick, that you want that dopamine kick again and again, and you will do whatever it takes to get it. But think about dopamine as your brain's way of ensuring that you come to a certain decision. Okay. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective, that if your brain wants you to take a certain decision, the only way to ensure that you take that decision is to give you dopamine. So every time a monkey eats a fruit, it gets a dopamine kick because it is good for survival. Every time a monkey has sex and reproduces, it gets dopamine because it is good for survival. Dopamine is the molecule that has everything to do with decision making. And just because evolution went from limbic to prefrontal doesn't mean that it has left dopamine behind. So as evolution happened, it carried dopamine with it, to the extent that even today, when your prefrontal cortex, your most evolved part of your brain, is trying to decide something, who do you think is helping you make that decision? It is dopamine. So this is one of the ironic things in decision making, that the same molecule that is secreted when you when you're craving for something, when you really want something, when you find something irresistible like Kaju Katli, is the same molecule that is being used in your most advanced neural networks when you're trying to decide what to do in life. So this is one of the reasons why decision making is complex, because it is very hard to disassociate your limbic system from your prefrontal when it is the same molecular chemistry that is happening in both. Okay. Now, whenever you talk about decision making from your prefrontal cortex, what are you really saying? You are saying, I want to do this. That is what decision making is essentially, isn't it? Whatever was your decision, whatever was the last decision you had to make, you are ending up by saying, I want to do this instead of the other thing. You are trying to decide what your action should be. In other words, you are trying to decide motivation. So now when you talk of decision making, think about it in terms of motivation. What motivates you? What is pushing you? And what are you being pushed towards? What are you driving towards? Because dopamine is the main molecule of motivation. One of the things that happens in depression is that dopamine receptors become sensitized, dopamine goes down, and motivation levels go down. And it doesn't even have to be clinical depression, but even when, for whatever reason, because of reduced sleep or poor diet or poor nutrition, if dopamine levels are down, you will find yourself becoming lesser and lesser motivated. There is a chemical background to motivation. So motivation and decision making are very closely interlinked. Any questions so far? 54 people listening. Welcome to everybody. Whoever has missed the first 5-10 minutes, if I'm going too fast for you, then please ask the question on the chat and I will take it up. Can you repeat again? Got lost. Okay. Repeat from where though? You understood about system 1 and system 2. You understood about limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. In both the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, they're both trying to keep you alive by making you do what those areas think is best for your survival. The limbic system thinks, eat healthy, eat high calorie diets because you don't know when the next calorie diet is going to come, have sex because it is good for your species, and run away from danger. This is the role of the limbic system. Dopamine is given as a bribe every time you do something that is good for survival. As the brain evolved, your prefrontal cortex thought, I can make better decisions. I can look at this more logically. But even then, dopamine is the molecule that helps the prefrontal cortex come to those decisions. Okay. Shai Prashant has asked a very interesting question. What controls the moral aspect of decision making? And we are going to get to that. In fact, I'm going to go back a little bit and describe the prefrontal cortex in a little bit more detail. Within the prefrontal cortex are different areas. So let us divide the prefrontal cortex into 4. Okay. The prefrontal cortex has one area called as the frontopolar. Okay, that is here. And the frontopolar area is the part that is right behind the center of your forehead, where the third eye is supposed to be. And the frontopolar area has the job of looking to the future. So it's literally FP stands for future planning. The frontopolar is the area that is responsible for thinking, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So it can look ahead, and it is a hugely important part of decision making. Because how can you decide something if you can't even see ahead into the future? You will only be deciding for the here and the now. And that brings me to the first point of decision making, in that if you're not using your prefrontal cortex, you lose the ability to look ahead. The limbic system has a very, very poor capacity to look far into the future. The limbic system is only capable of understanding what is in the moment, here and now. And it is not the limbic system's fault. If you don't have the data of what is going to happen day after tomorrow, obviously you are not going to think about day after tomorrow. You will logically only think about today. And if you only think about today, the decision is very clear. Eat whatever you want, have sex, sleep well, and roam and do whatever you want, because there is no tomorrow. Right? So that is what the limbic system thinks. Thankfully, we have a prefrontal cortex that has the ability to look into the future and know that, wait, saving is important. Wait, it is important to make long-term decisions, right? The second part of the brain is, or the second part of the prefrontal cortex is an area called as the V area. The full form is quite long. It is ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Let's just call it the V area. The V area is what gives value to things. The second aspect of decision making. So here we are breaking down the components of decision making. What do you value? You cannot decide on a topic when you don't value anything in it. So if you have to decide whether to get a new phone or not, if having a phone has no value to you, how do you make that decision? You have no say in the matter. But as soon as having a phone has some value, either positive or negative, now you can decide. If you have a positive value, then okay, yes, I do want a phone. If you have a negative value, you hate phones, then again, the decision is clearer. So when you are making a decision, try and understand where is your value in that decision. What are the components of that decision and what do you value in it? The third area is what will answer the moral aspect. This is called as the orbitofrontal cortex. And this area has the role of deciding what society wants. In other words, it decides the right place and time of a particular decision. So let's take a very, very simple example. You want to go pee. Can there be a more simple decision? You want to go pee. The reason that I love this example is because it makes use of all your neural anatomy. Your spinal cord is the first one to realize that you want to pee. If it was up to the spinal cord will just tell your bladder, pee. Go for it. What is stopping you? Your bladder is full. Why will you hold back? Go for it. Pee wherever you want. But the spinal cord cannot take that decision. The spinal cord will ask the area above. So spinal cord will ask the limbic system. The limbic system will think about emotions. And the limbic system will think about how good it will feel to pee or how worried it will be to not pee. But the limbic system is also not the end of the story. The limbic system will ask the prefrontal cortex. Now the prefrontal cortex will look around. It will think about, where am I? Am I in the bathroom or am I in a crowded train? Am I in a theater? And then the limbic system, or rather the orbitofrontal cortex, will tell the limbic system, do not pee here. There are so many people here. And the limbic system will say, oh shit, if all these people will see me pee, they will all judge me. And so the limbic system gets threatened. You get that sense of fear. And then the order goes down to the spinal cord to tell the bladder, do not pee. This is the decision making of whether to pee or not. Does that make sense? So now you understand how every part of your neural anatomy comes together to decide anything. Okay. And finally, the fourth part of the prefrontal cortex is this area called as DLPFC. And I want you to think of this DLPFC as the CEO of decision making. In the end, after everybody has had their say in the matter, finally, it is the DLPFC that has to take a call. Just like any CEO. A CEO can have lots of advisors. It's like the king. The king can have lots of ministers. But at the end of the day, the king has to take a call. So the DLPFC has to take a call on what the action should be. Okay. Now, coming to the challenges. What are the challenges of decision making? Why is decision making difficult? Why do we sometimes freeze? Why do we get conflicted? This is quite common. I'm sure that all of us have been in a situation where we wish we were better at making that decision, but we couldn't. We can't really understand what to do. So what is that challenge? The first challenge is that there is a conflict between what two parts of your brain want. Quite literally, if you think of yourself as a team leader, okay, I'm sure that in your organization, there is a hierarchy, there are team leaders, there are advisors, there are people who are in charge of public relations, there are people in charge of coding. So different people in your team will have different priorities. So if somebody says, let's release this product, different team members will come up with their own opinions. The coder might say, yes, absolutely, I love this piece of code, it is flawless. But somebody who's in charge of social media will say, wait, I can't possibly promote this. This is going to have a backlash from the community. We should change the messaging. I'm sure that all of you have had meetings where something like this had happened. Different team members saying different things. Finally, the CEO will have to step in and take a call. What if the two team members are equally loud and both of them are not ready to back down? That is when you have a freeze. You don't know what to do. So very often your limbic versus prefrontal cortex is the conflict. Your emotions say one thing, your logic says another. Sometimes the different parts of your prefrontal cortex are in conflict. So society says one thing, but you value something else. So you feel that you should marry somebody, but society says they are from a different caste. Wait, what is right? What is wrong? How do we come to this decision? So your prefrontal cortex is completely in a freeze. Whatever it is, different parts of your brain are in conflict and they cannot resolve it. The second challenge is maybe your brain could have resolved it if it spent more time and energy on that problem. Just like your CEO can step in and resolve that problem if the CEO is available. But if the CEO is only going to spend 1 hour in the office and the rest of the time he or she is playing golf somewhere, then in that 1 hour, the CEO is likely to do what? If two people are fighting and the CEO is only going to spend 2 minutes listening to the problem, what do you think the CEO will do? It will make a snap judgment. It will make a sudden decision because the CEO is a cognitive miser. The brain is a cognitive miser. It does not want to spend time. It does not want to spend energy on decisions that can be solved in a simple way. These problems, these challenges, these two things lead to something called as biases. And this is the opposite of decision making. This is what you have to remember when you take a decision, that biases exist in the brain. There are many, many cognitive biases. To put it in short, whenever our brain does not have complete clarity over a situation, it will just go for whatever seems simpler. Now, if I zoom in here, there are many biases. We are not going to go into the depth of biases, but I'll give you some examples. So all biases are unconscious. We can become conscious of them, but the biases themselves are unconscious. They will happen before you've realized that it happens. Anchoring is when you're focused on only one thing. So that initial piece of information will then affect everything later on. Availability bias, say COVID. Okay, so classical case, when COVID became a pandemic, COVID became an availability bias. Anybody with a fever, first think of COVID because it is available. We are talking about it all the time. So everything is COVID until proven otherwise. There is a belief bias, there's confirmation bias. If you believe that somebody is wrong, then you will only look at evidence that proves that somebody is wrong. And whenever there is evidence that proves that that person is right, you will ignore it because it doesn't suit your worldview. That is confirmation bias, so on and so forth. So there is a lot of biases, all of them coming from these two challenges. If there's a conflict between two areas, your brain does not want to spend energy. Let's just get this over with. Let's move on. Let's make a snap decision and move on. Got it? Okay. How do we get over it? How to make better decisions? Any idea? What do you think now that you know so much, now that you've got an insight? And I'm sure all of you as working class professionals have already figured out a way of making good decisions. You couldn't have reached wherever you have reached without figuring out how to make good decisions. So tell me, Oh, excellent. Avinash has started off with an excellent point. Better habits. I love it. We will talk about why this works, but I want to hear more. Hmm. Discipline. Very closely connected to better habits. Focus. Love it. Yes. Focus is a different thing. Have a routine, again, connected to discipline and habits. Healthy lifestyle. Very interesting. Make mistakes, learning from mistakes. Environment. Yes, connected with lifestyle. Consult others. Brilliant. Absolutely. Past experiences similar to learning. Yes, learning from mistakes. All right. Very cool. Absolutely. These are some of the very, very important ways of making good decisions. Why are we doing these things? We want to circumvent our biases because the biases exist. Whether you think you are biased or not, all of us are biased. All of us have roadblocks in our brain that we don't even know. Okay. Imagine that you drive from work and you're going home, and there is a shortcut from your work to your home. But for the last 20 years, okay, so if this is your workplace and this is your home, and there is a way to go from work to home here. But for the last 20 years, there is a huge block. Okay, there is a roadblock here. And for the last 20 years, you have been driving like this. The problem with cognitive biases is that on the 21st year, when the roadblock is removed, you will still, in spite of the roadblock being removed, you will still go like this because you will not even think of seeing if there is a shorter way, because this has become your habit. This has become your bias. And the thing with biases is that it prevents you from seeing it. And if you don't even see that option, how can you choose that option? And this is one of the fundamental problems of freedom or free will or choice, because you are free to choose, but you're only free to choose what your mind allows you to see. If you can't even see that choice, how can you choose? And that is where decision making, there's a fallacy in logical decision making. This is a fallacy in logic itself. When you say be logical, you can only be as logical as the knowledge that is available to you. So if somebody doesn't even know that this third option exists, then the logical choice between the two might seem very illogical to somebody for whom the third choice exists. Okay. So how to make better decisions? There are three broad headings. 1 and 2 is about awareness. The way to make better decisions is to be aware of yourself. You have to be aware of your own decision-making patterns. One of the best ways of doing this is becoming aware of your, like I said, patterns of decisions, and even more importantly, patterns of mistakes. So whenever you make a mistake or whenever you fail at something, you need to know what led to it. What was the problem? Where did you go wrong in your decision making? One of the best games to really make you understand this is chess. So in chess, there are a finite number of decisions that you can take at a particular position. But chess allows you to come back to that move and really analyze why did you take that decision and why didn't you take the other decision. So you need to look at your own decision making like this and try and figure out what is your pattern of decision making, where did you go wrong, and how can you improve it. One of the best ways of doing this is through documentation. I'm going to get to this a little later. The next step is feedback. Like somebody said, ask questions from other people. The truth is that everyone around you knows you in a very different way from how you know yourself. We all create this persona and we believe it. We fall for it. I think I'm an awesome person. I can do no wrong. Every word that comes out of my mouth is pure gold. Every tweet that I have is absolute. It should be sold as an NFT for $100 million. And all my friends are incredibly lucky to have me in their lives. That is my worldview. All of you may agree with this. All of you may agree about this with yourself. We all have that opinion about ourselves, and that's not our fault. Our brain makes sure that we have that kind of positive attitude about ourselves because we want to get to the next day. We want to be optimistic. But this high level of self-positivity can sometimes come in the way of you learning from your mistakes. Ask other people and be open to their criticism. And before I get to the hacks, Vinod has said, I have a question. Please, Vinod, go ahead, ask. You don't even have to ask if you can ask a question, just ask the question.
Sid, right now you said, let's assume that I don't know about what I want. Let's say if I don't know they say ignorance is bliss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's get on a topic and I don't know anything about it, but just that you have to make a decision. Yeah. So look at some of the politicians, or anybody for that matter. I forget about the politician. Somebody learned certain things on their own. Yeah, maybe an artist or anybody on that particular sense. Nobody thought that. So there was an evolution, just like an evolution. Somebody did certain things and they learned that art and they did that, right? So where does this come into the picture?
So we've spoken about this just now, right? When
sorry, sir. You said I know about it. So I made a mistake. Now I am correcting it out. Okay, so there is a idea already. There is a judgment can be made, but right now I don't have anything as data right in front of me. But how do I decide? So, or who is that? In terms of my brain, who is deciding on that?
So, okay. Whenever you are deciding on anything, there is always some amount of knowledge.
Yes.
Even if you don't know anything about it. Like, for example, if somebody were to ask me that I want to make an app, what language should I code it in? Should I code it in Java or should I code it in Python? Now, I am somebody with zero coding knowledge. Okay. Logically, I should be able to say that I cannot make this decision. I have no information about this, but I will still have some information about it. I may have heard that Python is used for Facebook, and I may have heard that Java is used in SAP, for example. That is not really useful knowledge, but it is still knowledge. Whatever I have, if I am unable to say, I don't know, and this brings me to the crux of this actually. Why do we find it hard to say, I don't know? Because that is where your limbic system kicks in. The limbic system is designed to be afraid of not knowing. The limbic system is designed to be afraid of ignorance because ignorance means death. Knowledge of ignorance means death. Let me rephrase that. True ignorance is bliss, but knowing that you don't know is terrifying. Why do you think kids are scared of the dark? Forget kids. Why do you think adults are scared of the dark? Why do you think adults are scared of not knowing why? We have to know why, because not knowing why is what has made us evolve. Knowing why has what has kept us protected, and not knowing what is behind that door, not knowing what is under the bed. Terrifying thought, right?
Can I
interrupt, Sid? Let me just complete this.
Yeah.
So the limbic system insists that you know. The limbic system doesn't want to hear that you don't know. The prefrontal cortex is saying, "Bhai, mujhe nahi pata." The limbic system is like, "Fuck off, you do know. Use whatever knowledge you have and give an answer." And that is why we just come out and make a decision anyway, even though you're not equipped to make that decision because we're afraid to say, "I don't know." Now you can tell me.
Okay. Is it something related with how you got, the childhood days where my experiences actually have a reflection on what I am today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So throughout your life, every stage or every decision that your brain has ever had to make will influence all other decisions later.
Just like,
So,
just like if my mom says anything and everything, the word is no. Okay. Yeah, I'm just saying that. The reason is that negation has a huge impact, rather than where I have seen parents who encourage kids to roam around, do anything and everything. Let's say if they get into a mall or anything, and they can do anything. I'm saying they put down the entire store down. They will just keep. There are parents
yeah,
who get annoyed by just even touching a particular, on the store, any of the items. So
yeah,
I'm saying it has a lot of impact on the kid, right?
it does. Absolutely. And can I just say that parenting is tough, but the truth is that you need to have both curiosity and discipline. And as working class professionals, we understand why. We need curiosity to grow. If you have no curiosity, then you will be exactly where you are for the next 10 years. Because why grow? Why look at the new thing that has come up? Why open a book? Why go on the net? Why try to get better? You need curiosity. It is that same curiosity in a child that makes the child open a box or climb a tree or climb a cupboard and galti se kuch gir jata hai, but the child is curious. The child wants to know if he or she can climb. The child is always wondering, how can I push myself? You do need that even as a working professional. But at the same time, that importance of saying no is to teach the child how to restrict their impulses, because not every impulse that pops into your brain is something that you should do. So you need the capacity to pull back, and you need the ability to be curious. So a true professional will have both, and a good parent should be able to sort of balance their parenting between allowing the child to explore their curiosity while teaching the child the importance of discipline. That is a very difficult balancing task. I am full of respect for parents who are able to, who have raised us in a way that we can now understand that this is how it is. But many people go for black and white. They think one or the other. Don't say no at all or say no to everything. And unfortunately, that's a problem. Okay. So we are going to go ahead. We're done with self-awareness. We have done with feedback of asking other people. Now, where is the challenge? Where is the problem of self-awareness and feedback? Fear. And thanks to Vinod's discussion, we have already talked about it. We are afraid. We are afraid of knowing something negative about ourselves. And this is where the amygdala comes in. The amygdala is a part of the limbic system that has the job of figuring out what to pay attention to. And one of the things that is most important to pay attention to is something that is coming to kill us. So if there's a tiger, that tiger will become the center of your attention. Nothing else is important except the tiger. So because of this, the amygdala has become known as the center of fear, but that is not really true. The amygdala is the center of attention. And unfortunately or fortunately, fear will grab your attention more than anything else. There is a reason why all news channels will constantly talk of negative news. All newspaper articles will be about the big catastrophe that happened or the potential war that is going to happen. Everything is about fear, because at the end of the day, the news channels want your attention. Newspapers want your attention. And the best way to keep your attention is through fear. Similarly, in this context, the reason that we are afraid of what prevents self-awareness and what prevents feedback is that if there is a negative feedback, if somebody comes and says, I did not like the decision that you made, we are threatened. We think our amygdala starts flashing and we think, are they saying that they don't accept me? Are they questioning my identity? In that case, are they going to kick me out of the tribe? At the end of the day, any social interaction is measured in terms of tribal instincts. And we will cover this when we come to the last part of the topic. But tribal instinct is that, are you going to kick me out? How dare you? How dare you threaten me with kicking me out of the tribe? Because if you kick me out of the tribe, I will die. So to avoid getting kicked out of the tribe, I will do whatever it takes to get over this fear. And one of the best ways of getting over fear is denial. Kuch hai hi nahi. This thing doesn't exist. This problem doesn't exist. This feedback that you're giving me is nonsense. I will not believe you. If I don't believe you, then I don't even have to deal with it. And why does the brain do this? Cognitive miser. Dealing with it is more energy spent. It is more time spent. Denial is so simple. I don't believe you. You are wrong. What do you mean my design wasn't good? You are wrong. That is a simpler way of your brain arriving at the same end state, which is, I am no longer threatened. So fear is the reason why we are not self-aware. We don't do self-talk. We are not honest with ourselves, and we don't listen to other people's comments when they are being honest. Okay, let's flip this over. What if you are not afraid? What if you are very confident in your ability to learn? What if you're very confident in your ability to evolve or become better as a person? What if you knew that whatever they say, I have the capacity to take their information, use it for myself, and become a better version of myself? Would you be afraid? No, you wouldn't. You would take whatever feedback comes your way and you would use it for yourself. So one of the best ways of improving your decision making is to get over your fear of negative feedback. Get confident that you will grow. Get confident in your own learning ability. I have an entire series on YouTube called Learning to Learn. And after I started reading about learning, I have realized that this is the one skill that every working class professional should practice on. No, apart from their core skill of coding or marketing or whatever, everyone should know how to learn to learn. So as quickly as feedback comes, you use it to get better. Okay. There's a saying that it's not failure that scares us. It is a fear of an inability to recover from failure. If you know that if you fall down, you're just going to come up and run, you will not be afraid of falling. But our main fear is that you will fall down, you will fracture, and you will die in that ditch. Let's be honest. That is what we are really afraid of, isn't it? Otherwise, why should falling be scary? There is no reason. But because falling is scary because you might injure yourself and die. That means that you will not recover. Hence, falling is scary. Similarly, failure itself is just feedback. But our real fear is that we will not be able to recover from that failure. Get over that failure, get over that fear, and all failure becomes feedback. There are certain hacks that you can use for decision making. Most of this you've already spoken about. The first one is externalize. And by externalize, I mean bring the decision out of the murky rooms of your brain into the cold white truth of paper, or now digital technology. But the whole reason behind people encouraging journaling or taking notes is because you need to bring data out. You need to bring the decision out of your brain so that you can see it, you can hear it, it needs to be in the real world. So externalize your decision making. Pros and cons list is a very good example. See the thing, let it all come out of your brain onto paper. Or if you are in the habit of making notes, make notes. If you're in the habit of using Notion, then use that. It doesn't matter as long as you can see it. This is also the part of why art helps in decision making, or art helps in therapy, or art helps in you coming to terms with yourself. Art is essentially externalizing something that was previously murky and could not be explained. Okay. So if you're an artist, great. Use your art to help your own decision making. Limbic circumvention. Essentially, if your brain has to take a decision, so that means if your prefrontal cortex has to make a decision, but your limbic system is in the way, and your limbic system is constantly saying, oh, log kya kahenge? Oh my God, I'm too scared. You want to do this, don't you? You are all those interruptions. You want to circumvent the limbic. I'm oversimplifying it, but the idea of limbic circumvention is, when is the limbic system activated? We already spoke about this. The limbic system is activated in the here and now. There is no limbic system activation if I tell you that somebody might punch you after 40 years. What will you do if somebody punches you after 40 years? Can you feel anything much? Not really. If I say in the year 2060, when you're walking on the road, you will come across a 2000 rupee note. What will you do? Try it. Imagine it. 2060. Okay. 40 years later, 39 years later. Can you really make a decision? It is too far away. Your limbic cannot feel it. But if I say, I'm punching you right now, I'm going to hit your face right now, what do? Suddenly it's your limbic system that is acting. Your limbic system has the job of deciding what to do. It is fight or flight. Do you run away? Do you fight me back? Are you scared? What is it? Here, your prefrontal cortex cannot make that decision. Your limbic system is making that decision. So one of the ways of circumventing the limbic system is very simple. And you might think, what? Ye sab iske liye bata raha tha kya? Is plan ahead. So simple. Plan ahead. Do not wait for your limbic to kick in before you have to take that decision. Very simply put, planning ahead is you outsourcing your decision making to yourself in the past. Because that past you is more reasonable, and your past you is not emotionally invested in that moment. So the past you, the limbic isn't interfering. It is only your prefrontal cortex. So just plan ahead, make tomorrow's decisions today, and you will automatically find that your decisions are improving. Whereas if you are waiting till the last minute to take that decision, it's not your fault. Your limbic is coming in the way. All your emotions, your fears, your secret desires, everything is coming in the way. Cool. Just plan ahead. And the second way of circumventing the limbic is take external help. Basically, ask someone else. Why? Because here you are using their prefrontal cortex, not your own. And their prefrontal cortex is free to act because their limbic isn't activated, because they don't care about your problem. They are not emotionally invested in your problem. So they can use their prefrontal cortex very well, because you can't, because your limbic is coming in the way. So if you have to make a decision in the moment, make sure that you are using somebody else's prefrontal cortex. And if you have to make your own decisions, plan ahead. Got it? The whole point of this is that your limbic system should not play too much of a role when you are deciding important life decisions. Now, before I go any further, we need to take a step back. The limbic system is not the enemy. Okay. The limbic system is actually what makes you human. The limbic system is what makes you you. It is what gives you emotion. It is what gives you depth. It is what makes life real. Without emotions, none of this really makes sense. It doesn't really matter. Emotions are awesome. They are beautiful. The problem is that we become reliant on our limbic system. The prefrontal cortex becomes lazy because the limbic system is so much better at taking decisions quicker because it has 100 million years head start that our prefrontal cortex says, yaar, aaj mujhe decide hi nahi karna hai. Let me live in the moment. Anybody who says, let me live in the moment is actually saying, I don't want to decide. I'm going to let my limbic system decide. And that is a great way to live. I'm not saying no. But be aware. This is where the self-awareness is. Be aware that that is what you're doing. You're playing a lazy man's game. You are outsourcing your decision making to your limbic system. And we did not evolve till here just to do that. Cool. And finally, reshuffle. Reshuffling, the concept is very simple. If you have to decide something, before you decide, you will notice that you are seeing the problem in a very fixed way. Have you played Rummy? In Rummy, you will, after staring at the cards for a very long time, you will only see a fixed set of patterns. And sometimes you are not able to make any headway. Card mil hi nahi raha hai. So what you do is you close the cards. You just shuffle it. And then you open it again. And then you rearrange the cards. And suddenly you will spot a new pattern. You will think that, oh, wait, I can make a sequence out of this. I can make a triplet out of this. Why didn't I see this before? So that is your brain seeing the problem in a new light. So try doing that with your everyday problems and you will see more and more solutions popping out. Okay. I know that this was supposed to be a 1 hour talk, but we are going to take another 20 minutes. Are you all okay with that? Cool. Okay. This brings us to what is supposed to be the title, but it is actually a part of decision making, which is critical thinking. What is critical thinking? I actually went online to look for what is critical thinking, and I found a very interesting definition. I'm going to read it out very quickly. It is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. It is based on universal intellectual values that transcend subject matter divisions, clarity, accuracy, precision, consistency, relevance, sound evidence, good reason, depth, breadth, and fairness. That's a lot. I hope you've all understood what is critical thinking. Well, I didn't. So I thought about it a little bit more. And this is what I feel critical thinking is. Okay, seriously, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is the ability to see whatever is in front of you, to understand the shape, the size, the magnitude of the problem that you are looking at. It is the ability to break down whatever it is that you're seeing, to break down the problem into its constituent components, to be able to pick up each component and understand each component in itself. And then critical thinking, ka important third part, it is the ability to put things back together in any way you would like, in a unique way, if that suits you, in keeping in respect to the problem that you're solving. That, according to me, is critical thinking. The ability to look at a problem in this all three dimensions, not just looking at it as a two-dimensional thing, break it down, and being able to visualize and create different structures from that. This process happens in the prefrontal cortex. So critical thinking is a prefrontal cortex action. The limbic system prefers linear thinking. ये है मतलब ये है. That is what the limbic system does. The limbic system does not have the capacity to reorient its imagination. It's very similar to first principles thinking. Absolutely. These are all different terms to try and denote the same concept, which is, can you go down to the basics? So first principle means going down to the absolute basics, go down to the physics of it. Or in human behavior, go down to the neuroscience of it. So neuroscience is first principles thinking in terms of human behavior. Where all is this useful? Critical thinking, that is prefrontal cortex thinking. Where all is it useful? You can use it to solve problems at work. You can use it to solve interpersonal relationship problems, to learn a new skill, to break old habits, to form new habits, and for creativity. Why does it play a role in creativity? So, when you are talking of creativity, you are saying that the brain is able to take something, change it, and use it in a different context or different scenario. That is what creativity is. Creativity actually doesn't create anything, any new original subunits. Like, for example, all poems are written from the same 26 letters. All poems are written from the same number of finite words. But those words have never been arranged in that sequence, in that context ever before. That is what creates a unique poem. It creates a unique pattern of the same original components. This is true of everything. Nobody invents a new color, but they just mix existing colors. Nobody makes a new, nobody uses new paint. They just use the existing paint in different shapes and intensity and density. And that is what creates a new painting. So there is nothing new under the sun, but there is every day there is a new system of arranging the old things under the sun. So that is what originality is. That is what creativity is, right? At the end of the day, everything comes from the same element charts. Everything comes from the same elements. So even from an evolutionary perspective, there is only creativity from pre-existing components. Every molecule is a creative solution to existing atoms, and so on and so forth. In the brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex has the job of creativity, because it is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that can take existing units of information and rearrange it into a new shape and form. Unfortunately, it does not have infinite capacity for creativity, because creativity is bound by our capacity to pay attention. You can only be creative on things that you are attentive towards. You cannot create things that our brain does not hold. So you need to be attentive in order to create. So one of the most interesting ways that creativity happens is if you are holding in your attention two things. So for example, if I say, think of a banana. Everybody's thinking of a banana. Now think of a car. Everybody's thinking of a car. Now imagine that banana in a car playing your favorite song. Now this is an image that you've never really had before. You've never thought of a banana driving that car, listening to your favorite song. Now, these three things have come together because these three things have been pulled from your memory centers. This is what creativity does. Creativity is putting together of things that have never been put together before. The reason why creativity is important in this discussion is because creativity in the workplace is an underappreciated skill. All of us have had to deal with unique problems every day. So the more creative you are, the better you will get at solving the problems. Because ultimately, what is a problem? A problem is a unique situation that you have not faced before, and you need to rearrange your existing knowledge in order to solve that unique situation. So the more creative you become, the better you will be at breaking down the pattern of the problem, understanding the problem in a new light, and using your pre-existing information and rearranging your pre-existing information to put it in a new light so that you can now solve it. The better that you are at critical thinking, the better you will be at creativity. All right. And finally, the last part of the topic is me versus us, I versus us. This is tricky because everything that I've spoken about so far, from neuroanatomy to decision making to creativity to critical thinking, all of that I'm talking about one person, one brain. But what happens when I add another brain or multiple brains into the mix? Now, every brain will react to that problem just like one brain would. So my brain will take in information, your brain will take in information. My prefrontal cortex will try to come up with solutions. Your prefrontal cortex will try to come up with solutions. Here, there is an issue because how do brains work together? So whenever you ask the question, how does a team work? You are essentially asking, how do brains work together? And this is an ancient problem. It's not a new problem. Right from the time human beings started working together to hunt an animal, we had to figure out how to work together. And the fundamental driver, the motivation for working together is survival. So this is part of the evolutionary psychology of a tribe. Now you might think whenever you go for the meeting in your workplace that, oh, we are all here together in 2021. Look at us, so evolved. But all your behavior has been decided 50,000 years ago, because everything is based on two primary motives. One is survival. You need to survive. And the other is growth. You need to get better. You need to improve upon your previous standing. What happens between these two impulses is sometimes they can be at conflict, because to survive, you need to work together, and to grow, sometimes you need to work against each other because there are limited resources. If there are three managers or there are three assistant managers and there's only one manager position, the three assistant managers have to work together to make sure that their product survives. So here they have to cooperate. And for growth, one of them will be chosen as the manager because there is limited resources. So here they have to compete. In every team in the world, you will find cooperation and competition as inherent aspects of the group dynamic. And once you start seeing it, you cannot unsee it. And too often we think that it is either or. My team is so cooperative or my team is so competitive. But the truth is that every team has both. And every team should have both. For a team to function, you need to cooperate and you need to compete. The best example for this is sports. The best teams in the world are teams that have figured out how to cooperate really well. Think of football. If I pass the ball to you, you'll pass the ball to me, I pass the ball to you, and that is how we score as a team. But for each team to get better, every player needs to be competitive. Every player wants to feel that I want to get better and better. And the only way to get better is to be selfish. Work hard and make sure that you are noticed. Work hard and make sure that you stand out. that doesn't mean that you don't pass the ball back. So this calculation of cooperation and competition has to be constantly there. And this is what I like to term as competitive cooperation. Everybody knows that you're competing. Everybody knows that you're cooperating. So a team that has competitive cooperation is likely to do very well, because that is the way to get ahead. Because if you go back all the way to the diagram I made of different people, what is happening in between is a question of trust. And that is what the all of game theory is built on. I don't have the time to go into game theory, but all of game theory is built on trust. Do I trust you or do I not trust you? Are you going to help me or are you going to hurt me? So what cooperative competition does is there is building of trust that we are going to cooperate and we are going to compete. And once you know that equation, you will find that a team gels much better, right? We know that said competition is a healthy habit. It means there's opportunity, also known as growth. Absolutely. If you don't compete, then you don't grow. That's just a fact of life. If you're not competing with somebody else and you're competing with yourself, still competition is necessary. Okay. So that kind of completes my talk. I think I took up 25 minutes more than I thought I would, but well, the discussion just went in very interesting lines. These are my social media handles. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can follow my YouTube channel. There are tons of videos on discipline, on focus, on how to improve your attention span, on procrastination and what is the neuroscience of that. And I'll keep putting up more interesting videos as per the questions that come to me. If you have any questions, we have 5 minutes. We will talk about it. Question on a previous topic: is it fair to say that if you're lacking motivation, you need a dopamine kick of some sorts as they're closely linked? Yes, it is. Actually, it is fair to say that your body needs dopamine. So whenever somebody says you should go on a dopamine detox, they don't truly understand dopamine networks, because that is the wrong word. And the irony is, I agree with the concept. I don't agree with the terminology. You cannot detoxify from dopamine. Dopamine is necessary for your survival. If you don't have dopamine, you will have no motivation. That is what depression does. What you need to do is to learn to say no to yourself. So what dopamine detox is actually talking about is the ability to say no to your limbic impulses, your limbic habits, habits that you've picked up along the way and that are now ingrained inside you and that are not healthy. So say no to chocolate, say no to cake, say no to alcohol, say no to smoking, say no to any addictive behavior, right? So that is what dopamine detox is. And that is a great exercise. We all should have the ability to say no to our limbic system on choice. Again, limbic system is not the enemy, but it is not the boss either. That's the take home message for today. Let all your decisions come from your prefrontal cortex. All right. Any more questions?
Sid, this is Prasanna here.
Hi, Prasanna.
Thanks for an outstanding session. And a lot of it I was listening to while I was driving, but it was fascinating. And I'm a student of psychology myself and learn a little bit of neuroscience, but your quote on heuristics and biases and Dr. Kahneman's work is amazing. And I'm wondering maybe sometime if we could discuss, early warning systems that we can deploy, particularly around psychosomasis, and how we can observe our body that can give us the warning systems or indications that we can respond to before our limbic system kicks in or amygdala hijack happens. I think that would be an interesting discussion. And the other thing is that would be very useful for all of us is if we can talk about the dynamics of interactions, whether it's in the context of TA or other models that are available
Yeah.
it would be very useful, because we don't work alone, right? We always interact, we work with the team, we work with other individuals. Having
Yeah.
awareness of our mental state and how the dynamics play out, I think that would be very useful. If you can make some time for it, I think that would be great for everybody.
Brilliant. I really love both the points that you raised. When you talk of warning signals, the thing is that we all get warning signals. It's just that we don't know that they're warning signals, and it is individual. But our limbic system ensures that you do get a fair chance, you get a fair trial, you do get that moment to choose. What happens is that when you don't take up that option too many times, that becomes a habit, and your limbic system says, okay, that must mean that this is the right decision. So we stop getting notifications. Think about it that way. In the earlier days, every time the limbic system would make a certain decision, you would get a notification. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? But if you keep clicking yes, then it is like a self-learning algorithm. After that, it just does it. So some of the common warning signs of amygdala activation is that sometimes it's pain. You might start getting body aches or headaches. In fact, one of the pathophysiologies of migraine is increased stress. Sometimes you can have palpitations, which is
fluctuations in breath as well, right?
Fluctuation in breath. This some people will have a feeling of impending doom, and it can be quite scary. You might suddenly feel like, oh man, something horrible is going to happen, and you don't really know why. There are so many people who think that I'm having a heart attack because it's actually part of something called as the autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system controls your heart, it controls your breathing, it controls your blood pressure, and it also controls your stomach, it controls your intestines. So that's the last part of it. A lot of times your emotional state decides if your digestion is happening or not, and vice versa, because it's not a one-way street. It's a conversation. So if you're constipated, then your emotions can go for a toss. And if you're if you're emotional, then your digestion can be affected. So everything is two-way.
Right. And I want to tie this back to the point that you made about awareness, right? And sometimes emotions are very abstract, that we may not be able to have awareness of it or even label it. So I think it might be interesting to develop the technique or habit to be able to observe how it manifests in physiologically, right? Most of it is psychosomasis, and there is a manifestation of what we feel in the body. And I'm thinking maybe if we can train ourselves to observe, which is gross and which is real and which is easier relatively to observe, right? That's what I was kind of referring to as kind of early warning systems. But I think very, very interesting. And I think it probably is worth an entire session to talk about, what those could be and how we can observe and how we can train ourselves to do that.
One thing that I would definitely recommend everybody do is try to pick up on your anger patterns, because fear is a little bit more difficult, because fear can present itself in the smallest of ways and you might not always pick up on fear. But if you are somebody who gets angry, then that is an easier pattern to pick up. So there are very clear signs that you will know that I'm getting angry. And anger is a great exercise in limbic control. So if you're able to step back from anger, then it's a good starting point, because then you will understand what it feels like to say no to your limbic after it is activated. And I believe that anger is the first step, because controlling anger is easier than controlling fear, because fear is more primal. So that's a good exercise. Coming to your point on self-awareness, meditation is beautiful if you do it properly, but you don't have to do it in the classical sense. You don't have to sit in the chair and sit on the ground on cold stone for 3 hours and just keep breathing. Meditation is simply awareness. So journaling is meditation. So even if you're just writing down everything that you're feeling, that is also meditation. So try it out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I know we're wrapping up, but I just wanted to recollect 2 or 3 things that you mentioned and kind of leave the team with a couple of things that would be very useful for them to take away, right? So awareness is something we just talked about. And another major takeaway for me, and I'm sure for the rest of us, is also learning to learn. That's something that I think we should practice. And also we talked about creativity, we talked about competitive cooperation. I think these are some things to go back and reflect on, and how it affects us in our day in the life at work. And thank you so much, Sid, for taking the time.
One take-home message that I would like to leave you is, now that we've understood a lot more about ourselves and you've understood why you are the way you are, it's a small step from this to understanding why others are the way they are. And that's what leads to empathy. And that is a huge factor when it comes to teamwork. So if you know what somebody else is going through, because now that you know yourself, you realize that, okay, we are not wired that differently after all, then it would help, because empathy is, even before language developed, empathy developed. So empathy is literally the right side brain equivalent of language. So try and be more empathetic to the people around you, and you will find efficiency improving.
Empathy is the most understated skill ever, even if you consider leadership skills in the scheme of things these days. So
absolutely.
You hit the right nail.
Empathy is a superpower. It's the closest thing we have to mind reading. So the more empathetic you are, you actually do get a professional advantage, or even a interpersonal advantage if you're an empathetic person.
Maybe we should wrap up with one last question. I'm sorry, Prasanna, this is a repeat question in the chat, and I thought I should bring Sid's notice to it. This is from Yamini. External help feels like influenced decisions rather than decision made out of free will. Can you share some insights on this? I think you touched upon free will a little bit, about making choices and so on and so forth. But if you could elaborate, this would be the last question of the session.
At the end of the day, the decision is still yours. But the reason that I like that detour of asking somebody else for their opinion, and it usually helps if it's somebody whose opinion you respect and you have tried out before, and there is a level of trust, is that it allows you to step back a little bit. So very often you don't have to be an absolute monk or an ascetic to make the right decision. It's okay to feel, but asking somebody else for their opinion just gives you that mental space to step back a bit. And that much is enough for you to make a better decision, as opposed to making it